so give us about 30 seconds.
Absolutely. Shoot me a thumbs up when you think we're live. Okay. All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee for May the 20th. I'd like to acknowledge that we're not gathered, but we're in various territories of the Coast Salish and the Chalmouth people. I'd like to remind everybody, just as a virtual meeting, that if you could remember to keep all the directors to keep your mic muted until you go to speak. Remember to turn your mic off after you've spoken. I would like staff to keep your mic and your camera off unless you need to, you'd like to insert yourself into the discussion, provide some information to us, then turn your camera on and raise your hand. You can either raise your hand in front of the screen or electronically. We will be voting by raising of hands in front of the camera, and I will try to record all of those who are in opposition to a resolution and read them out. I would like to ask that everyone turn off or mute all of your other electronic devices, and I don't think I've missed anything, so I will now turn to, we have an agenda that was published last week, and before we adopt the agenda, I know that there's one new business item that I was delinquent in getting in, but it's one that I think there's similar ones on the agenda today. It's a bursary for a RAF student at Lake Cowichan School. Is there any other item to add to our agenda today or any changes to our agenda, Ms. Legault?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of any other items.
All right, could we have a motion to approve the agenda with that new business item? Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. Go to the adoption of the minutes number 2. We have the meeting of April 29th, 2020, and the recommendation is that the minutes of the Special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of April 29th, 2020 be adopted. Do we have someone to move that? Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Trying to be methodical for our recording secretaries. M2, minutes of the meeting held May the 6th, and the recommendation is that the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of May the 6th, 2020 be adopted. Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Alternate Director Haim. Is there any discussion on that item? I see none. Call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. The motion carries. And I want to thank Director Nicholson for her somewhat delayed but thoughtful thumbs up when she votes. It's very helpful for me as the chair of the meeting. We go to item number 3, and I would ask Ms. Legault if there's any business arising from the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of anything.
Thank you. Next, we go to our public input period, and just remind everyone that there has been an email out there for people to submit input for the meeting. Ms. Legault has advised me that there's a couple of items, and remind everyone that might consider this for the future. It's a 15-minute period, maximum of 3 minutes per submission. And I would turn to Ms. Legault, who has those items for her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's 3 items today. The first item is with respect to agenda item R2, and it's from Bernard Yearling. Dear Chair, refile 02A17RS for the development of a campground. I have 3 comments. 1, stability. The campground will be situated on a landfill site. This landfill was established by end dumping, not by laying down thin 0.6 meter layers followed by compaction of each layer. As shown by the January 2020 landslide on Cougar Ridge, landfills can be unstable. Macquarie Geotechnical Consultants has noted tension cracks in the fill site due to improper compaction resulting in settlement and slope creep. Before approval is given, there should be evidence that the site is re-engineered as recommended by Macquarie so that each lift is no more than 0.6 meters thick and properly compacted. 2, slope. The proposed slope of the fill site is 2H to 1V. That is, for every 2 units of horizontal distance, there is 1 unit of vertical distance. This results in a steep 26.6 degree slope. I note that for the Cobble Hill Holdings contaminated soil landfill site off Stebbings Road, the Ministry of Environment insisted that the slope of the final closure should follow the 2016 regulations for a municipal landfill site, that is 3H to 1V. Indeed, in the final closure plan for the site, the proposed slope is actually 5H to 1V. The slope for a landfill site that will be used as a campground should, at the very minimum, follow the 2016 BC landfill criteria for municipal solid waste. Approval should not be given until the site plans are redesigned. 3, water. Is there sufficient water available? This needs to be investigated. The one well on site I could locate, when drilled in 2018, the completion date was November 21st, had an estimated yield of 15 US gallons per minute or 21,600 USG per day. However, this is only a driller's estimate and no formal testing was done to determine if the well could produce this amount when the water is withdrawn daily during the dry season. According to Lamb and Hughes, 1980, Water Demand at Recreation Facilities Utah Water Research Lab found that the average water consumption per RV unit was 93 USG per day, ranging from 77 from October to June to 157 USG per day in August. Using an average of 125 USG per day per RV unit, 50 units will consume 6,250 USG per day. In addition, there will be laundry facilities and a restaurant, hence water consumption by the RV park could easily be 10,000 to 15,000 USG per day. It behooves the applicants to do a proper water test during the dry season to determine whether there is actually sufficient water for their RV park needs. I note that many of the wells of the Mill Bay Waterworks District produce anywhere from 7% to 31% of the initial production estimates. If this also applies to WTN 117249, then it may only produce anywhere from 1,500 to 6,700 USG per day over the long term. The second item is from Cliff Evans of Shawnigan Lake with respect to item R4, the Villa Erie rezoning. He notes that the purpose of this report is to provide an update on changes to the application where the height of all buildings and structures in the CD5 zone shall now not exceed A, 15 meters for buildings with a flat or nearly flat roof with a slope under 1 to 12, or B, 17 meters for buildings with a pitched roof with a slope greater than 1 to 12. It's nice to see these changes to a maximum of 4 building stories, but the fact remains that the Malahat Fire Department still only has a standard fire truck with a 24-foot ladder. It's a volunteer fire department and some members work in Victoria. We can understand that it is hard to get a full crew together for fires and be first responders for traffic accidents and other 911 calls. Along with this additional regulation, each new proposed building will require a development permit. During the DP process, the application will be reviewed by CVRD building officials, public safety, and Malahat Volunteer Fire Department in relation to what type of systems will be required for fire suppression. The proposed site design will also be reviewed to assess the ability for emergency vehicles to attend the site. The Shawnigan and Mill Bay Fire Departments should also be asked for input too. In the past, CVRD has basically made a similar agreement with the Elkington Forest project on the Goldstream Heights. There was supposed to be a fire hall built when a few houses were completed. To this date, a few houses were never built, but the developers had the forestry land rezoned and the local neighboring residents still don't have a fire hall. We should learn from the Elkington Forest situation and make sure it doesn't happen again. The Malahat area is being developed very fast, and this is bringing many added responsibilities to the Malahat Fire Department, and the overload quite often is being taken up by Shawnigan and Mill Bay Fire Departments. There's the new skywalk being built, which will bring hundreds of tourists. A proposed campground is on today's agenda, and of course the Erie. There's a breaking point of what these volunteer fire departments can handle, so we must ensure that they get proper equipment, training, and resources to do their jobs. He's quoted the CVRD recommendation. Fire protection objectives. Objective A states that developments will ensure water supplies are available. Policy 23.7 states to reduce the risk of loss of life or property during wildfire interface event, lands outside the VCB areas are subject to wildfire interface guidelines. Section 24 of the Cowichan Rural Development Permit Area. Policy 23.8 states that new development in the OCP area will pay its own way for the provision of fire services, including fire hall construction and provision of necessary equipments. We need a concerted effort to ensure we give the fire departments everything they need to do their job. After all, they put their lives on the line for us and work for free. The third and final item is from Susan Kaufman. It is with deep concern that I read about applications coming forward today where the community has lost its ability to provide comment either by way of the applicable Advisory Planning Commission referral or by the waiving of public hearing requirement. With respect to item R3, are the concerns of those most affected being ignored in favor of the applicant and not what makes sense of a community? R1, are these requests made necessary by poor subdivision layout or by simply trying to maximize the benefit to the property owner at the expense of others in the vision contained in the OCP? Again, today, the EASC directors are being asked to consider a large development on the Malahat R2 at 835 Trans-Canada Highway. It should be noted that the CVRD website experienced software issues, which meant the EASC agenda and supporting documents were unavailable for the public for a period of time, and presumably the director's review. R2, for this application, there remain significant concerns related to highway access and slope stability. Further to that, proposed OCP amendments are contrary to the vision and desire of the community to protect rural resource lands for long-term forestry and wilderness values. Is it another case of death by 1,000 cuts as the CVRD moves to redefine the OCP and zoning bylaws by spot rezoning and OCP amendments without greater community involvement? And R4 and unfinished business items, Villa Erie. Mr. Chair, I'll reiterate my concerns raised at the April 29th EASC meeting and draw to your attention conflicting information contained within the two reports of today's EASC agenda, most notably the number of stories that will be permissible. The report contained in unfinished business states a limit of 3 stories, while the report contained in R4 states a limit of 4 stories. I also raised concerns with Ian McDonald and by way of his CC to Mr. Limshu reference to the building code and requirements for sprinklers. I hope that either of those staff will be able to provide comment on this during the debate today. If there was ever a time for pause and greater community consultation for development in the Malahat region, it is now. There are significant concerns related to the value of RUR lands, highway safety, and extreme fire hazard. Moreover, the time to pause and reflect on the Malahat Fire Department's present and future capability to respond with the necessary manpower, training, and equipment. Let's not overburden these hardworking community volunteers without a fulsome review of fire services in the area. And that concludes public input period.
Thank you, Ms. Legault. Delegations, I see we have none. So we move on to correspondence, and first one, C1. And the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board. And I should note too that the next board meeting in which these items from our meeting will be held on May the 27th. So the recommendation for C1 is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid electoral area A, Mill Bay Malahat, in the amount of $100 be provided to the Shawnigan Residents Association to support the Buy Local Business and Organization Directory. Turn to Director Salmon. Would you like to move that item? Moved by Director Salmon, seconded by Alternate Director Haim. Any discussion on that resolution? I see none. Call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. C2, the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid electoral area C Cobble Hill in the amount of $500 be provided to the Cowichan Secondary School for a 2020 graduation bursary. Move to Director Wilson. Moves that item, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? I see none. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. C3, that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid electoral area C Cobble Hill in the amount of $100 be provided to the Shawnigan Residents Association to assist in the creation of the local digital library. Turn to Director Wilson. He moves, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion on that item? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? See none opposed, that motion carries. Item C4, that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid electoral area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $500 be provided to Francis Kelsey Secondary School for a 2020 graduation bursary. Moved to Director Wilson, moved by him, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. And I'm just looking for the wording of I'm going to move the new business item up. It falls right into this category. That it be, where's the recommendation? It be recommended to the board that grant and aid in the amount of $500 to Lake Cowichan School to assist in a graduating high school student from Cowichan Lake South Scotts Falls to pursue additional educational or career training opportunities. I'll move that. Seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. Ms. Legault, any information items? None. Go on to reports. So we go to R1, and I gather I'll be calling on Mr. Limshu for report number 1. Mr. Limshu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to switch over here. So item R1 relates to application number DVP 19G02. The property is located at 3715 Gardner Road. So the purpose of the application relates to the fact that the applicant would like to construct a new garage on the property in this general location. The proposed building would replace 2 existing accessory buildings and a portable storage shelter. So if you look at the diagram here, you'll see in this picture the existing buildings that's being discussed. The idea is that these buildings would be removed and replaced with the new building that's being constructed. The proposed development that you see before you, there are 2 plans. The survey drawing to the right indicates the general location of the existing buildings versus the drawing to the left outlines the proposed new garage. The proposed variances would reduce the minimum front property line setback from 7.5 meters to 3.05, as shown on the drawing, and also to reduce the minimum interior parcel line setback from 1.85 meters to 0.91 meters, as shown here. Notices were sent out to 17 property owners within 60 meters of the subject property. We did receive 3 letters. There was a letter of opposition from the neighbor to the immediate west. And in that letter, the neighbor has indicated concerns related to perceived decrease in property value, reduction in light and views, potential for increased water runoff and drainage, and potential future property building restrictions as reasons for their concerns. I do believe that the applicant is online and they may have additional information. Thank you.
I think before we go to the applicant to see if they have anything to add, I would ask of the directors if they have any questions for Mr. Limshu. Could you lower your recommendation, please, so I can see my colleagues? Are there any questions for Mr. Limshu? Director Smith.
I was just wondering, the letter that was sent out to the surrounding residents, the setback was indicated that the bylaw states 3 meters. And in the documents that we're receiving today or for this agenda item is 1.85. Has there been any additional discussion around that topic for the residents who have responded? I notice in the one response they're looking at a 3 meter. Have we had additional conversation with those or provided them with that clarification that it wasn't 3 meters but 1.85?
As far as I know, we have not provided any additional information to the neighbors. So we've only sent the one notice with that typographical error. So just for the benefit of the committee, what Director Smith is referring to is within the bylaw, the setback for the interior property line is 3 meters or 10% of the parcel frontage. So in this case, the 10% would apply, which means that side yard setback should be 1.85 meters. Hence the recommendation in the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. Alternate Director Haim.
Thank you. Just a question to staff. There's one of the response letters from a Mr. Milne. It doesn't make mention of where his property is in relation to the subject property. Do we have the location of that one?
I'm gonna ask our planning tech, Chloe Boyle, for assistance on that.
Ms. Boyle, I think Director Smith might have some information on that as well. So do you have that at hand, Ms. Boyle?
The Mr. Milne is on the other side of this property of the Brocklebanks.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see Ms. Boyle's picture. Does that answer your question, Director Haim, Alternate Director Haim? Excellent. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, do the Brocklebanks have anything they would like to add for the committee to hear?
No, we're only available in case there's questions regarding the rationale.
Very good. Director Smith.
Yes, I'd like to ask questions of the applicant, Brocklebank. I was concerned, is there the hedge that is between your property and the adjacent property 3719, I think it is. There is a hedge there currently. Is this hedge being removed and how will it be replaced?
Our neighbors had indicated that they would want us to remove that hedge, and then we would work with them to either replace the hedge with something that's more manageable, or perhaps put in a fence that is agreeable to both of us, whichever avenue would be best for us.
Ms. Boyle, I think that was noted in the staff report, was it not?
Yes, it was noted.
Thank you. Second question, Director Smith.
Yes, I have a question regarding the roof of the building. Is it going to look the same as the property next to you on the other side, the way that it's squared up 4 ways? Or is it going to have, where will the drainage of the slope from the roof be? And also, how much will the overhang of the roof be on that property side, as there's 3 feet available from the base of the building to the property line? How far will the overhang go into that 3 feet there?
Do you have the answer to that?
The drainage off the roof be going?
Okay, so the roof that will be a simple peak roof as opposed to the cottage style roof on my other adjoining property. The peak of the roof will be 13 feet. That's as low as we could get it. And the overhang, I believe, is 2 feet. The peak runs 90 degrees to the adjoining property so as to minimize any light restriction. The drainage itself will be perpendicular to the adjoining property and will join an existing drainage field.
Does that answer your question, Director Smith?
So just a follow-up, I just want to make clear that the overhang on the property side, that's on 3719, will leave 1 foot between the property line and your building overhang?
I'm just estimating. I don't know the exact number, the exact distance for the overhang.
Can staff help us with that? Ms. Boyle?
Yeah, there in the zoning bylaw for electoral area G, there are setback exemptions for eaves, canopies, cornices, gutters, sunshades, and unenclosed stairwells if the projections measured horizontally do not exceed 1.5, no, that doesn't apply, 1.5 meters in the case of the front yard or side yard. The applicant has not provided any building plans for the property. They are waiting to have their variance approved before they go through the building permit process. So I don't have any further information.
Anything, Director Nicholson?
Thank you. So it says in the report that stormwater management DPA doesn't apply to property subdivided for the date of adoption of the OCP. So is that true for this particular law?
Yes, from what I understand, it was subdivided before the date of adoption of the OCP.
Does that answer your question, Director Nicholson?
So if I could follow up. So I am wondering, how can we be assured that there won't be stormwater management issues as a result of this building here, that which is what the neighbor is worried about?
Mr. Limshaw or Ms. Boyle?
I didn't quite catch the question. Are you able to say it again?
I believe the question was, how can they be assured that stormwater management issues won't be affected by the structure that's being proposed by the applicant? And if I'm not mistaken, that's outside the permit of the variance that's being asked. Am I correct?
That's correct. However, to answer the question, at the time of building permit, the building department will not only be looking at the design of the buildings to ensure compliance with the bylaw, and should the variance be approved today, compliance with the variance that's been approved. The other thing that staff does look at is ensuring that there's connections with respect to the drainage from the building into an appropriate system to catch any stormwater on site.
Exactly as expected. Any further questions, Director Smith? For the applicant.
This may be for the applicant or it may be for staff. Based on the information that the 60-meter residents, the 17 received, because they received the information saying 3 meters and the actual distance is 1.85, does anyone know how this respondent who has responded that they are not in favor of this, how would this change for them, or has anyone had a conversation with them to know how that would we get a better, would the response change or not? Has anyone had a conversation with the neighbor that's adjacent to this property?
As far as I know, we have not had any follow-up discussion with the neighbor raising concern. Certainly, the error that was in the notice provides for a greater variance relaxation, or suggests a larger relaxation, when in reality the proposed relaxation is less than what was put in the notice. I would anticipate that the concerns, not wanting to speak for the neighbor, I would expect that their concerns would still be relevant with respect to this particular application. But we have not had any direct discussions with the neighbor to confirm that.
I'll go to Director Yanni DiNardo, but once again, remind everyone that the recommendation is in regards to a variance of setbacks for the front and side yard there. Director Yanni DiNardo, please.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order. I see the applicants have raised their hand a few times to speak, but I haven't seen them being able to speak. So I don't know if there's a miscommunication or not, but I do recognize that the applicants have wanted to answer a couple of questions and haven't been able to.
I was just about to go to them. We had staff put their hands up wanting to engage, so I will go to the Brocklebanks now. Go ahead.
Thank you. To speak to the stormwater concern, there is a ditch above our property that gathers all the uphill stormwater. As well, I've already had a site visit from the building inspector, Norm. He has the building plans in his possession. We spoke about drainage as far as the eaves, and I'm going with his recommendation on that. And he saw no concerns whatsoever with the location.
Thank you for that input. So I see no other hands in the air. My agenda screen just went blank, so just let me, Director Smith again, and on the variance, please. Question to the applicant.
Yes, to the applicant. I know that I know both the applicant and the neighbor beside, and they're amazing Saltaire people. So I think this is really important that we make sure that both neighbors are happy and can move forward together on this. Have you spoken to the neighbors beside you to sort of get a feel for how they feel about your application? And is that allowed to ask the applicant?
Well, I'm struggling here in that we're dealing with information that's been provided to us, and we have to make a decision based on our staff's input, not on what the conversation that a neighbor had or an applicant had with a neighbor. So I think I will rule that question out of order and go to I'll go to the director for the area. The recommendation is that be recommended to the board development variance permit number DVP 19G02 for PID 000767735 be issued. What is your pleasure, Director Smith?
I'd like to move that recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Wilson. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. That motion carries, and that resolution will go to the board on May the 27th. Thanks for joining us, Brocklebanks.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
Next item we go to is R2. We'll just give Ms. Legault a chance to let the Brocklebanks go, and Mr. Limshu to bring up the recommendation. I have just got a note from alternate director Haim that he has left the meeting for a short period of time, so we are at 8. So not that my math is that bad, but we'll have to just keep an eye on close votes because now 4 is a tie. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that the agent for the application has also been brought into the meeting, Kaylee Wiseman.
Okay. Kaylee. Okay. And I will now turn to Mr. Limshu for R2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R2 relates to application number 02-A-17RS. Property is located at 835 Trans-Canada Highway. The purpose of the report before the committee is a follow-up on the Electoral Services Area Direction with respect to the application to amend the South Cowichan Official Community Plan Bylaw number 3510 and the South Cowichan Zoning Bylaw 3520 to facilitate the development of a 50-site campground at the on the proposed property. The subject property is approximately 37 hectares or 91 acres. The current OCP designation is rural resource, and the current zoning is rural resource 1. The amendment bylaws before you would amend the OCP designation to tourist commercial, and the proposed zoning that's being requested would be Rural Comprehensive Development Zone CD11. As indicated, this was before the EAC back in December 4th of 2019. And at that point in time, the committee passed the following resolution that staff be directed to continue working with the applicant on the application to address outstanding zoning matters and bring the application forward with draft bylaws to a future EAC meeting for consideration. So that's why we're here today. So the maps in front of you just kind of give you a sense as to where provides a bit of context in terms of where the property is located on the Trans-Canada Highway. So with respect to the official community plan, as outlined in the staff report, there's a summary of policies within the staff report that identifies or highlights various policies with the OCP. The long and short of it is that there isn't any definitive direction with respect to the OCP. Given the policies within the current OCP, one could make argument either for or against the proposed amendment. With respect to the proposed zoning bylaw, we are proposing a CD zone, and the zone would be applicable to the entire site and would address both the existing residential use on the property and the proposed commercial campground. The zone has been drafted as a CD zone, and it indicates that the principal permitted use on the property would be single-family dwelling and campground. Within the staff report, it does go on to restrict the use of the campground site to only 5 hectares of the parcel. There are also further restrictions which limit campground use to seasonal use only. So it would be in operation not exceeding 7 months throughout the year. The campground is for short-term stay accommodation only, maximum 29 consecutive days. The sewer service and drinking water shall be contained within the defined 5-hectare area. And the campground site would still be subject to our standard campground bylaw number 1520. The maximum number of sites would be limited to 50 campsites on the property, in addition to the existing single-family dwelling. Staff is also recommending a 30-meter strip along the highway as a natural buffer to ensure that there's screening between the highway and the property in order to maintain that rural character for the lands along the highway. With respect to the seasonal use, the applicants are proposing that the campground be open from April 1st through to October 31st. And as indicated, campers would be limited to a maximum stay of 29 consecutive days. With regard to highway access, the applicant has completed an access review to ensure compliance with Ministry of Transportation site distance standards. The ministry has confirmed that the access review meets their standard. Having said that, the ministry has identified the following requirements for the proposed development. 1, that they apply for a new access permit. 2, that it would be only for right in, right out in terms of access. The ministry is also requiring highway improvements. In this case, it would include a deceleration lane and the consolidation of the accesses within that general location. Item number 4 includes a check-in strategy for the applicants. So the idea there is during peak season, you wouldn't have traffic spilling out or backing up onto the highway as campers await to enter the property. Staff is recommending that Section 219 covenant be registered to ensure that no campground uses occur until the necessary access permits have been issued by the ministry and the required highway improvements have been completed. With respect to water, the applicant has received a conditional water license from the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resources. The permit allows for a maximum of 25,000 cubic meters of water to be diverted from Spectacle Creek between November 1st and April 30th. The applicants are intending to divert that water into a reservoir. And on the concept plan in front of you, you'll see the general location for that proposed reservoir. The idea being that that reservoir would serve to supply water for the facility. With respect to sewer, Allen Health has stated that a construction permit from the public health engineer is required to construct, install, or extend the drinking water supply system. So staff is recommending that a covenant be registered to ensure that no camping occurs until the necessary construction permits is obtained and the required works are completed for water supply system. There is an existing soil deposit operation occurring on the site. The applicant has indicated that they intend to decommission the soil deposit operation on the property and use the fill area for the general location of the campground. As a condition of rezoning, staff is recommending that as a condition of a covenant, that a covenant be registered to prohibit any future soil deposit operations to occur elsewhere on the property. Community amenity contribution, the applicant has offered a monetary community amenity contribution of $20,000 and had previously suggested that it go towards the Spectacle Lake Provincial Park. Staff is recommending that the community amenity contribution be collected prior to adoption of the amendment bylaw. I should note that the rezoning is only one process that the applicant has to go through. And the purpose of the rezoning is to determine whether or not the proposed land use is appropriate for the property. Should the property be successfully rezoned, the applicants will have to come back and obtain a development permit. And through the development permit process, we would get into the sort of the more detailed design layout for the proposed campground, which also would speak to things like landscaping and screening for the property. I think I'll leave it at that and open the floor for questions. So I believe you're muted, Mr. Chair.
That was my fault. Sorry about that. I've got myself, or I've got Director Salmon. I've got myself. Is there anyone else have questions for staff at this point? Go ahead, Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Frank. So on the seasonal operation and how we would enforce that, I guess two questions. One, on the 29-day limit, is there any practical way to actually enforce that? And then further on the seasonal, on the 7-month limit, will RVs be allowed to be left parked on the site in the off season?
Mr. Limshu.
So with respect, I'll answer the second question first. So with respect to the 7-month operation, the limitation is really on folks camping and using the property for camping in the RVs. I guess theoretically, there might be those individuals that leave their units on site, but certainly they would not be able to stay in those units during the off-season months. As far as enforcement of the 29-day rule, I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to that one. A lot of it depends on the accuracy of record keepings by the operator, and certainly the diligence of bylaw enforcement to track the campers on the property.
Follow up. Yeah, I'm more concerned about the seasonal one because I think in reality, if the RVs are left there, there's no way to determine whether, if bylaw happens to come by, if someone's visiting their RV, if they're actually living there, or if they are just visiting for the weekend. I just want to note it's about 15 minutes from Langford. It's very likely people could live there and be away during the day when bylaw comes by. So I am concerned about that aspect.
Mr. Limshu?
Yeah, with respect to and that's why staff is recommending that the covenant be on title, because with respect to the covenant and clearly identifying the start date and the end date for the camping season, it's a lot easier for bylaw enforcement to enforce the rules. If you're outside of those that season, there shouldn't be anybody using any of those units for whatever reason. I know that our manager for bylaw enforcement is online, and perhaps he might want to comment on that further. But what we're trying to do here is to attempt to make the rules as black and white as possible, to ensure that we have the appropriate bylaw enforcement.
Who do we have from inspections and enforcement? Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Mr. Lipshu alluded to, having it seasonal and nobody should be there in the off season. So it's much easier to enforce than if it's open all year round. It really comes down to a burden of proof. So in this case, it'll be much easier to us that if we're just looking at certain months, they can be there. With regards to the 29 days, that's a bit harder. We would have to rely on their records. It's very hard to check on that every day that it would be the same person. But again, it would be a bit of an honor system there. But I think as far as anybody camping I think they said to October 31st. So anything after October 31st would be quite easy to enforce.
One more follow-up, maybe.
Final question.
Yeah, so I'm just, I remain concerned, and I'm just partly with reference to the other campgrounds, the one behind the Malahap bungalows. They're supposed to be temporary, and yet they end up being all year-round residences. And is there a reason we could not either have a gate on the site in the off-season, or not allow parking of RVs in the off-season?
Mr. Limshu or Mr. McDonald?
Certainly, we can have follow-up conversations with the applicant regarding those regarding those restrictions. I do know that the agent for the applicant is online, and perhaps she may be able to comment on that.
I'll go to her in a moment. Mr. McDonald, anything to add? Okay, I'm next on the list, and I too share some of Director Salmon's concerns. And this isn't my first rodeo. I've got 5 in my my electoral area within 10 minutes drive from me, so I've got a pretty good idea. And despite some of the more rigorous regulations that have been put in place, and I won't name the sites, but we have people that have shifted to year-round living in them, and there's issues, and you know, it started off with the one manager's property as a year-round residence, and it's progressed. So a couple of things that I would ask of staff. Is there any reason, like I get the 29 consecutive days, but that's just not strong enough. We need to have a something along the lines of a maximum of 120 days per calendar year. And the reason why I say that is when as soon as you've got a 7-month window, somebody's going to try and figure out a way that they can make that their permanent residence. And I'm thinking specifically of snowbirds, where they can say that they are a permanent resident and that they're there 1 day longer than 6 months. They'll go and get their post office box at the local post office. And as long as they can say that they're there for that, well, half a year, then they're good to go. So I don't think the 29-day consecutive limit is sufficient, because you're going to have people that will figure out a way that they can go away for a weekend and come back and move into another site. So I'd like to see us explore a way that we can ensure that this doesn't become a permanent resident for someone that is 6 months here and 6 months somewhere else. And you know, we don't want to see structures. And I think I have to agree with Director Salmon too, that I don't think storage of RVs on the site when this is a campground, it's not an RV park, it's a campground. It shouldn't be allowed that we would have storage on site for these, because then it comes to the point where they're not functioning properly, or they're not mobile, and they end up being parked there year round. So what can staff suggest around wording to ensure that those concerns are addressed?
Generally speaking, you know, certainly we could look at adding language to either the zoning bylaw and or the covenant to provide more clarity with respect to the length of stay for folks. You know, I think I certainly recommend keeping in the 7-month period, because again, it's black and white. You know, either you're there during the season, and if you're on site during off season, you should not be there, and it makes it easier for bylaw enforcement to enforce the regulations. But certainly we could explore more robust language either through the bylaw or through the covenant moving forward.
And just a quick follow-up, despite the fact that we want to hope that all of our residents and visitors to the area are going to be honorable and use the honor system, have we ever attempted an official sort of logbook of some sort? Because I can just envision somebody's going to be in Unit 6 for 28 days. They're going to go away for a weekend, and then they're going to come back and they're going to be in Unit 27. And we need to be able to track that individual, should we put in language for a maximum of 120 days in a calendar year, that we can go to a log and we can track via license plate name and that sort of thing. So I'd like to see that pursued. I'll go to Director Acton next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application is got more issues than just the bylaw issue that we won't be able to enforce. It's really unfortunate. We're trying to put a silver slipper here on the ugly stepsister, and it's unfortunate that we didn't let the applicants know this earlier. It has not been well received at the commission stage, And we're just trying to make this work. I really would like to be honest to the applicants and just say no, just defeat this today. We just keep sending it back, trying to make it work. There's so many issues here, and we shouldn't take it lightly, changing the OCP. The community has stated what they want here, and if we're going to start doing spot zoning and the Malahat, we need to do a full OCP, what we want happening there. Like this application, we jump too quickly when people just have a piece of property and they decide they want to rezone it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good for the community. Right now, where the community is over here and the application is over here, we keep sending it back to kind of bridge that gap, but I think we just have to be honest. This gap cannot be bridged, and I will not be in favor of this application today. And I don't want to be a part of the decision.
Thank you for that comment, but we're still in questions for staff, and I think that's more than appropriate if we get a resolution on the floor, that type of comment. So I'd like to remind everyone.
I'm just trying to say we're trying to put like a square peg in a round hole here.
I hear what you're saying, but let's follow process. Questions to staff. That we've still got the applicant online waiting to come forward. Director Yanni DiNardo, do you have a question for staff on the file? You don't. Anyone else questions for staff? Director Salmon, question for staff.
Thank you. Regarding, Frank, you mentioned soil won't be allowed to be deposited on the rest of the site, but quarrying and mining, is there anything to prevent that from continuing on the rest of the site?
Mr. Limshu.
At this point in time, there isn't anything explicit prohibiting that kind of use on the site. As you know, quarry and mining are regulated by the province, and certainly if it's the wish of the committee and ultimately the board, we can certainly add language to prohibit those uses.
Mr. Limshu, I'm pretty sure that we can't. I believe that the province can allow for quarrying and mining of gravel in any zone on any property they wish in the province. I could stand to be corrected, but I don't think we can put in a zoning bylaw that would prohibit those activities. Go to Director Nicholson next.
Thank you. I just wanted to be perfectly clear. There hasn't been a public meeting held about this at all, have there?
Mr. Limshu.
Certainly, since my time with the regional district, there has not been a public meeting. I do believe, and perhaps the staff planner, Sheila Herrera, might be able to provide some further color on this as to whether or not there have been any sort of public meetings or meetings with the neighbors.
Ms. Herrera, are you there? And I see you, Ms. Chirolf. We'll get to you in a second. Ms. Herrera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of any public meetings, just the APC meeting that was held previously.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera. Ms. Chirolf, I think I'm about to stand to be corrected.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't do that. I just wanted to, for the clarity of the committee, for everyone to be aware that it is possible for restrictive covenants to specify greater restrictions on a property than would be allowed in a zoning bylaw. So I just wanted to be for that to be clear, and the covenant is essentially a voluntary agreement between two parties. So that would require the applicants to voluntarily bind the property further than the board could.
Thank you, Ms. Chirolf. That was very diplomatic of you. Thank you. Any further hands? I see no more questions for staff, so I would invite now Ms. Legault to have the applicants join us. Oh, the applicants have joined us. Keely, do you have anything you'd like to add to our discussion today?
Good afternoon, committee. I suppose just to address the one comment that was specifically directed towards us in relation to the RV storage. So I will note that that was not identified in the zone specifically, but we are open to limiting RV storage in the zone. It has not come up previously to date with conversations with the planning staff, but we're open to that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I will now turn to my committee colleagues and ask if there are any questions for the applicant. Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, Kaylee. My question is about the highway access, and I know MOTI has okayed this, but I'm still quite concerned about the safety there. It's such a major artery, and the placement of the driveway, which is where the passing lane and the slow lane merge, is right where the exit, where the RVs will be coming out, turning north, and there's no room for an acceleration lane. There's the ravine of Spectacle Creek is right there, so it's quite a squeeze. I've gone by there many times, and on the weekend I stopped and looked and just watched, and it's a bit of a racetrack. They're jockeying for position as vehicles pass or try to get in front, while they still have a chance. And I'm envisioning RVs, big RVs with sometimes trailers, sometimes heavy, sometimes rentals and experienced drivers. It just seems dangerous to me, and I'm wondering if you have any response to that.
I think as we discussed with planning staff that to date, obviously MOTI will be the approving entity on any of the final plans regarding access. But also it's been operating as a fill site to date with obviously very significantly sized trucks, some with trailers coming and going. And to the best of my knowledge, there's not yet been any concerns related to that with sizable vehicles.
Follow up. Just waiting for.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand the dump trucks with professional drivers. Yes, but I'm not as convinced with RVs with the whoever may be driving who may not be as familiar with both the road and with their driving. But in any case, it seems to me that acceleration lane would be a good idea. In fact, if we look at the scenic pullout immediately north, there is an acceleration lane. Or if we look across the street at the Villa Erie, there's an acceleration lane heading the other way. I think it would be required here, except that it can't be because of the ravine. So that's seems to be what I'm getting and what I'm feeling and what I'm hearing from community. This is a real significant obstacle.
Ms. Wiseman.
Sorry, to date, I'm not sure if the planner, Sheila Herrera, has any further comments because she's been in direct contact with MOTI regarding our access plan. But as I said, we're just planning on meeting to the best of our abilities those requirements.
Does Ms. Herrera have any further comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have any further comment? I think it was all outlined in the report in terms of what MOTI would be looking for, and ultimately when it came time for this application through MOTI from the applicant, they would have to satisfy the conditions that MOTI puts forward at that time. So if there is any sort of change between sort of now and then, that would still get caught. But currently what we've got is sort of a list of requirements that MOTI has passed along to the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera. Looking around at the screen, I see no further questions for Ms. Wiseman. So thank you very much for your input today. And we have a recommendation, but I'm going to turn to Director Salmon first and ask the director for the area. What's your pleasure?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'd just like to make a few comments on this one. It's been the biggest application I've had so far, and extends back even when I was alternate director. We had the first tour of the site. I had a lot of public comment about it.
Director Salmon, I'm wondering if we could maybe perhaps get a resolution on the floor, then you can be the first to speak upon having a resolution on the floor. Would that be, I think that would be appropriate.
If you like, I was thinking we get comments and then a resolution. But they want to have the resolution.
It's best practices to have a resolution on the floor for your colleagues to debate.
All right, well, I'm going to have to reluctantly, and appreciating all the work that the applicants have done, but I'm going to recommend option 2 in this case, which is to not move forward.
Okay, I will have to dig into the resolution and find that, but go ahead. I will get the resolution. Go ahead with your comments. I'll read the resolution when you are after your comments.
Are you a seconder?
Yeah, I guess we do have a seconder in Director Wilson. Go ahead, Director Salmon.
Thank you. So I just wanted to outline some of the problems that I think we have with this one. Maybe in categories, we've got basically 5 or 6 of them. We've touched on some of them. Maybe just as an overview, one of the most common feedback I get on this is the, other than the highway safety, but the location of where this sea of RVs is going to be vis-a-vis the scenic lookout, the first one on the Malahat. And that's sort of the welcome to Couch and lookout where they've got the signage and the totem pole. And you pull over at the summit and you look at a beautiful view of Saanich Inlet, Finlayson Arm, and the Olympics if it's a clear day. But in the foreground, through a screen of trees, a thin screen, you see what's now a cleared site and what, if this went ahead, would be 50 parked RVs and vehicles. So that is quite a change from the lookout you see now with the Gowan Provincial Park. It's almost pristine. We'll have the Skywalk lookout built behind, out of sight right now. I'm not sure whether when it's built, whether it will be able to see the RV park, but that's just my first sort of comment, the most common one. We talked about the highway safety. Just to add to that, the OCP, and this is all in the staff report, prohibits or recommends against direct access to the Trans-Canada Highway. There really should be a frontage road to make it safe. Maybe just on that, the final comments, page 8 of the staff report is a good summary of the sort of official, the OCP policy issues. But so there was I want to just mention the no direct access to the TCH. There's also the wildfire hazard rating is extreme here, and they discourage development of interface areas with that extreme rating. I know there has been some fire abatement measures, but I'm not sure that it's enough. And the third one in the final comments there, page 8, the amenity contribution is, let's just say, well below what the OCP recommends in $20,000. If we look across the street at the area, it's $200,000 and 37% of the property under a protective covenant. So those 3 things are issues. I would maybe just finally, another issue. Well, we've talked about the enforcement issue, but the geotech report, as it's a fill site, they identify, the geotech report identifies basically issues with slope hazard, potential slumping, potential broken water lines that could soak into the ground and cause further instability in the slope. So I think I've maybe summed up some of the issues with this application.
Thank you, Director Salmon. I've got myself and Director Yanni Donardo. Are there any other directors would like to make comment on this? And just for clarity, the resolution that has been moved and seconded is that it be recommended to the board that OCP and rezoning application number 02-A-17RS be denied and a partial refund of application fees be provided in accordance with the CVRD's development application procedures and fees bylaw 4267. And my comments, I'll make them brief. We're here to decide on land use. And well, I'll acknowledge that there were little stops along the way like that were created, like the Malahat and these small communities of Massachi Lake and little collections of commercial nodes of activity We know today from all the input that we've had and all the courses we've been to and all the training that we've had that we need to be concentrating on compactness and collection of our services and facilities, and I just don't see the proliferation of additional infrastructure being put in an area or new land uses being introduced to an area that really is devoid of a lot of services. There's really no water service up there. There's no sewer service up there. There's a fire department which is somewhat stretched, and it's away from a lot of things, let alone the traffic issues and the likes. I think we have to be smart about the decisions that we make, and that I'm sure that every applicant that owns a piece of land that has a great idea may think that that application or that idea that they have is a good one. You know, they may believe they have merit, but we have to do what's best for our communities, and our communities say that we need to cluster our businesses and our activities. And we know that there are recreation areas in the Cowichan Valley. We know that there are business hubs. We know that there's industrial areas. And in my sense, this one just doesn't quite fit. It's being used for currently as a fill site, and I don't see the land use of RV campground, which is big mobile motorhomes traveling around the community, and they're not really near anything except for one tourist attraction. I don't know that we need to be contributing to more vacationing on wheels. And I was kind of sad to see that this is strictly an RV or a recreational vehicle type of overnight facility that was being planned, and it doesn't provide any of the inventory for the other types of camping and recreating that people often use in the Cowichan region. So I can't support it either. I'll go to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a complete opposite view of you. I don't believe this should be denied. I see this as tourism, and one of the things that we're seeing in our community is there's not enough RV space, and I get that a lot here. And I'm not sure, well, MOTI is responsible for the road in and out. There is going to be the skywalk there. There's a lot of things that the Malahat is doing where they'll need to contribute to people coming in and out. Currently with COVID, we are being suggested that we stay in BC and do a lot of staycations and support locally now and not do a lot of air travel. So I'm seeing this as completely opposite. I think this is an opportunity. If it's currently now, if you're looking from the Malahat and it's a dump site, between a dump site and seeing RVs, I'm not sure what the difference is. To me, this is very confusing. This is actually kind of led a developer down the road, and then we let him down the garden path, and then we say no. So I really think that there's opportunities here, and we were going in the right direction for this. And I would encourage more tourism and more staycation and more coming here to people in British Columbia actually staying in British Columbia. And also, if you know, in Lake Cowichan, people that come into the RV places in Lake Cowichan, they actually bring all what they need to the campsite. So we know that for a fact, that when they come, they stay in a campsite, they bring all their shopping and everything with them. You know, we've witnessed that for many years. So I think done correctly, I think this is opportunities, and it'd be a shame to deny. So that's just my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. I turn to Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I must admit that both Director Salmon and Director Yanni DiNardo make some very valid points, and I'm in between here. I fully take the points that Director Salmon has made, and more importantly, the points that Director Yanni DiNardo made, because this has been in the pipeline for such a long time that it's almost reprehensible that we have to turn it down, that we would be asked to turn it down at this late stage, considering everything that's gone into it. I don't. I honestly don't know which way to go here at the moment. It's very, very, very unfortunate we find ourselves in this position.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. This has probably gone on too long, and in my opinion, we need to stop the bleeding because this could be denied when it goes to public hearing, and this is. I don't take it lightly changing the OCP in this way. And, a dump site is not forever. Also, it has to be reclamated eventually. So I think the community could decide in the future what they want to happen in the whole area. But this application, in my opinion, has way too many issues that are going to come up and hurt us in the long run. And it's, in this case, it's not good for the community. There's nothing that I see in it personally, or at least in my opinion, that the community would want.
I see no other hands in the air. I am now going to call the question, and I'd ask you to hold them up. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Director Yanni DiNardo is opposed. That motion carries. That will go through to the board on the 27th. I see that we've been sitting here an hour and 20 minutes, and we've committed to try and keep it to about an hour. Let's have a short 10-minute break. See you back here at exactly 3 o'clock. Remember to turn off your microphones and your camera. I'd like to welcome everybody back from their stretch break, and we are now on item number R3. I'd like to thank everyone for their cooperation to this point and go to Mr. Limshu to introduce us to staff report R3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R3 relates to application number RZ19B04 for the property located at 283 Skylar Circle. It's a photo of the site plan. So the purpose of the application is to amend Shawnigan Lake zoning bylaw number 985 to amend the dwelling width requirements under the existing RR5 zone to facilitate development of the property. So committee members may recall last year, October 23rd, 2019, development permit number 18D19 was actually issued to the property owner to approve a development permit to allow for a subdivision. The proposed subdivision is in front of you. It's approximately 68 parcels. This particular subdivision represents phase 3 of the overall development. So the overall development site includes phases 1, phase 2, phase 3. Within phase 1, phase 2, there's approximately 120 existing lots. And so this is the final phase. So for clarification, the proposed zoning amendment is not needed to complete the subdivision. The applicant does have the ability to continue on with the subdivision. However, in reviewing the development, the applicant is requesting to remove the 5-meter dwelling width restriction that comes into effect at the time of obtaining a building permit to construct a dwelling on the lot. Applicants indicated that removing the 5-meter restriction will make the lots more marketable and allow for a variety of housing types. So the existing zone is a rural manufactured home 5 zone, RR5. And when you read through the bylaw, it resembles both a typical single-family residential zone as well as a manufactured home zone. So a bit of a hybrid zone. Anyone that's been through the development will recognize that the units that have actually been constructed are not necessarily your typical mobile home unit. The 5 meter wide restriction basically relates to the typical width of a standard mobile home unit. But as I said, if you drive through the project, you'll see that there's a combination, mainly what we refer to as stick-built homes in the development. In addition to the relaxation on the 5 meter width, staff is also recommending that the front yard setback for garages be increased from 4.5 meters to 6 meters. And the reason for that is it allows for, it reduces the effect of having the garage stick out at the front of the building, as well by increasing the setback from 4.5 to 6, it actually allows for a vehicle to park in a driveway in front of the garage. So just to clarify that, it is only the garage portion that would be set back 6 meters. You could have like the front living room area of the dwelling be located up to 4.5 meters to the road. The other recommendation that staff is putting forward is to relax the side yard setback to 1.5 meters for both interior side yards. The purpose for this is just to allow for more flexibility in design. It doesn't necessarily allow for any additional lots to be created other than what's been shown and what's been approved through the development permit application. In summary, all the above amendments for this RR5 zone relates to the siting of the dwelling. As I mentioned, the overall density isn't, the purpose of the amendment is not to increase the overall density of the project. The proposed building coverage on the parcel is 45%, and that will not change. So the size of the buildings won't change. Really what it does, it just provides more flexibility in terms of design for the frontage of the front of the units, and allows for, rather than creating this sort of row effect, it also allows for more variation in the streetscape. So you could have buildings set closer or further from the road, depending on the building design, which ultimately provides for a more interesting streetscape. So with that, I will open the floor for questions from the committee. Sorry, I think you are still muted, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, I am. I've got myself, Director Salmon. Okay, hang on. Salmon, Yanni, Donardo, Smith, Nicholson, Kuhn, and can I just remind everyone, so right now I've got Salmon, myself, Smith, Nicholson, and Kuhn. Anyone else? And remember, these are questions for staff. We've got the applicant, their agent here as well. So Director Salmon for Mr. Limshu, please.
Mine's actually for the applicant.
Okay, I'll put you on. Okay, your question's for the applicant. Can it wait, or do you want to pose another question you can wait?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. My question through to Mr. Limshu. So I think I understand this this application fairly well, and I think it was around when this was originally created. So just to clarify, so we're contemplating allowing the width on these fairly small lots, the width of the building to be increased. And if we increase the width of the building, then we're going to, by necessity, have to stick the garages on the front, because you can't get by if you take up the majority of the width with the building and you only have 1.5 meter setback on either side. My question is this: in the current configuration with the 5 meter building width, does that allow for a vehicle to go along one side or the other of the building for rear parking?
I think the applicant might be better suited to answer that question because.
Okay, fair enough. I'll go on the list and ask him that question when it's time for him. Director Smith.
So this file's been around for a while, and I'm just wanting to go back a tiny bit. Do phase 1 and phase 2 they did not have these new restrictions? Is that correct, Mr. Limshu?
That's correct.
So when we're looking at the photos of phase 1 and phase 2, phase 3 will look very different than those two phases?
There is the potential that it will look different from phases 1 and 2.
And both phase 1 and phase 2 are sold out, it looks like.
Both phase 1 and phase 2 have been constructed.
Okay, thank you.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I guess my question is really, I'm trying to understand why the original restrictions were in place.
Mr. Limshu?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question in a comprehensive fashion because I was not here at the time. I do know that the zoning on the property is in place for a long period of time, and the development of phases 1 and 2 were predicated on the intent. So, when you look at the title of the zoning, it does refer to it as being a manufactured home park. However, what's occurred over the years isn't that the development hasn't been constructed as your typical manufactured home park, in the sense that units are constructed offsite and then brought onto the property and sited on each lot. There have been numerous instances where the construction's actually taken place on site.
And I'll jump in and provide some context, and I turn to Director Yanni DiNardo to correct me if I'm wrong here. But my understanding was way back when this was initially proposed, there was a component of the deliberation was a variety of housing opportunities for people, and that this wouldn't all be sort of a high-end typical subdivision, and that part of the initial proposal was that this was going to be a manufactured home park, and then there was a relaxation where there was the allowance for stick built to happen on that site, but there was always the provision for a more modest type of housing to be provided in this development, and I think that's what this phase was about. So the first two phases went ahead initially as a mobile home park, then the stick-built provision was allowed, and now we're looking at the completion phase, I believe, and it was the provision of a more modest housing opportunity in this development. So that's how I recall it. I don't know if Director Yanni DiNardo has any memories of it. She's nodding her head that seems to be her recollection as well. So do you have a follow-up, Director Nicholson?
Well, I don't know much about construction, but does this mean that they'll be less modest and less affordable?
That's probably a question for the applicant. I hope he's taking notes, because it sounds like the third or fourth question in his direction. But Mr. Limshu, do you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I think generally speaking, we are still looking at fairly small parcels and higher density in the area. So certainly that equates to cost. Now, the specifics around whether or not it's going to be more affordable or less affordable, yes, certainly I believe the applicant is probably better suited to speak to that than me.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. Director Kuhn for staff. Director Kuhn.
Yeah, I just looking at the subdivision plan. Maybe it just appears that way, but the way it looks to me, it's very dense, and I have some reservations about people visiting there. There's I don't know how many. It looks like about 10, 15, or 20 parking spaces for visitors. Now these are an awful lot of units there, and I wonder if that is enough. And I wonder if they're so densely packed, if people come and visit, can they actually park on the road there, or are they forced to park on the common property parking? I just have concerns when you pack something that densely into a property, you kind of bound to end up with congestion and all kinds of problems. So that's the only concern I have.
Mr. Limshu, can you answer that?
Sure. Just to clarify, so the proposed amendments that are on the table doesn't, like as I explained in my presentation, does not include the number of units. So the applicant is able to create the subdivision as shown today. That's not going to change. With respect to parking, in the proposed common area, there are provisions for some, I'll call it off-street parking. And it's my understanding that the provision of that area for off-street parking is predicated on the applicant's discussion with the existing strata folks within phase 1 and phase 2. I mean, technically, yes, you could park on the street. But if everybody parks on the street, certainly it becomes congested. The other issue the other factor that one should consider is with the proposed change to push the garage further back, it does create that space on the driveway to allow for a vehicle to actually park on a driveway in front of that in the house, versus if you left the setback at 4.5 meters, vehicles parking in front of the house, depending on the vehicle, may actually overhang into the road.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. Director Acton. Question for staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My mute button wasn't coming up quick enough. So I've been operating under the understanding with the variance, the width of the building, that with the old restrictions, it was quite narrow. So you actually, the way that building materials are set in size and construction, that actually you could build a bigger space with better layout, better use of materials than what was previously set out. So it was explained to me by one of my APC members that it's just a better use of materials, and essentially, by the sounds of it, you'd get a bigger house for the same cost without as much waste. Would that be a safe assumption?
Mr. Limshu, do you want to take that on, or should we ask somebody from our inspections and enforcement department to maybe offer an opinion on that?
Yeah, I'm not able to answer that question just because the building designs may vary from lot to lot.
Mr. McDonald is on the screen, so why don't we go to Mr. McDonald? Did you hear the question?
I did, Mr. Chair. It was a comment without knowing what they're proposing, and I'm not sure what Director Acton has been told, so that's very hard to comment on without knowing more detail.
Thank you. Director Acton, do you have a follow-up? Thank you. So are there any more questions for staff? Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Limshu. There was an OCP policy, I believe, when I was going through the application. And I just am aware of this with placemaking, and it is policy 13.5.4. Community gardens are encouraged in this designation. And I'm not really I'm seeing a high density, but I'm not really seeing a whole lot of placemaking and a delightful place to actually live and have like walking space. And there's a lot of housing that's high density, but I'm not seeing too many alternatives in this. So was there any thought or any discussion on community gardens or anything like that?
That sounds like an applicant question, but I'll go to Mr. Limshu first.
I'm not aware of whether or not there's been any discussions. Certainly, I have not had any discussions directly with the applicant about those particular issues. I would certainly direct that question to the applicant to see what he may have in store for phase 3 of the development.
Okay, fair enough. Follow-up for staff, though?
Well, yeah, because mine is about mobile home parks per se, what I've noticed over the years, and I was involved in that one in our discussion with stick-built versus mobile homes. And what I'm seeing in my community is actually for affordable homes that the mobile home parks are actually what you could say is affordable housing. Then I've noticed what we did with Area G is we then turned around and said that this mobile home park could have stick built, and then it becomes unaffordable. So I don't know, maybe I can ask I don't know who to ask that, but it was an observation that I've seen over the years. And I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
So once again, everyone, I'd like you to stay on task with me here. Comments are for when we have a resolution on the floor. We finished with questions for staff. We'll go to Dale Bellavance as the agent and applicant here, and provide you with the opportunity to add anything you'd like. And I think there was about 4 or 5 questions that people wanted to ask of you. So Mr. Bellavance, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. So to be clear, this particular application is for the amendment to R5 to increase the frontage. The frontage restriction was initially put in place under MP1, which was Mobile Park 1. And when it was revised, I would say inappropriately, because 100% of phase 1 and phase 2 are stick built, and they are built to the typical side yard setback, interior setback combination of 1.5 and 3 meters, which is common throughout the entire rest of the Cowichan Valley Regional District, except for this piece of property. At the time phase 1 and phase 2 were built, the building department, in fact, allowed relaxation without going forward and in front of the board, so that those homes, all those still built homes, could be built to that typical side yard setback. And so we came forward to the board in October. We brought it forward as a DVP, and it was actually passed by the board in October, only to be identified by the director of planning that legally the directors could not pass a DVP that referred to density. And so that's why we're in front of you now. The MP1, which was in fact to ensure that there was spatial separation between either a single wide or a double wide trailer, as I said, carried forward into RR5. We have also taken a look at the density, and we have combined on this particular development for phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3. We have 21.3% of the area as recreational property, not including that odd wedge that's on the other side of the railway track. One of our initial meetings was, in fact, with the strata to talk about the strata's needs and what the strata would like to see, because being a strata, any properties, whether you call them recreational or park, well, not park because CVRD doesn't want to take this over as public park, any of these spaces, becomes common property. So in our discussions with the current strata, their gravest concern was not for an increased area that they would have to maintain, but was for parking. And so that's why we developed the contemplation park, and we also agreed to develop that additional visitor parking. Each one of the lots has a guest parking allocation for it with the required or with the recommended setback for the garage, as Mr. Limshu just spoke to. But this additional parking we also put in place for guests, because often people fill their garages with storage and can't access it for their own vehicle. So that's how we came to where we are on the site plan. We're not talking about changing the site plan. We're talking about the setback requirements to best utilize building materials, as the director spoke to make this a functioning home. That 5 meter setback for lots less than 460 meters doesn't make this a very useful layout. There's not a practical or useful layout for the construction of the home. So you're actually not able to amortize your cost of your property well into your functionality of your building. When we first looked at this subject property, the owners of the property asked us to do an evaluation. So we evaluated per square meter cost for small properties in Langford, Millstream, Cowichan Valley, Mill Bay, and Duncan. And we came on the market at less per square meter for a strata lot than any one of these other areas. And we're currently advertising that a turnkey home, including the land, will hit the market for less than $450,000. It's pretty hard to find a comparable because there's not a comparable. So in our opinion, in the developer's opinion, these in fact are very cost-effective residents for someone who would like to morph from a condo or an apartment to a fully detached single-family home. So I can speak to the cost per square foot because we've been working with the developer to see how cost-effectively we could build. We've actually gone to 3 different builders in the area. We've issued a tender so that we could truly evaluate, if we had a stip sum, what those costs would be and be able to pass those on to our end users. And so that's the position that we're currently in. The increase, or probably the decrease of the side yard interior setbacks of 1.5 for both sides was a recommendation by staff. We hadn't asked for that. We certainly think it gives more flexibility for the end user or occupant of the home once it's developed, but that wasn't a request. Our request has always been the same one that we had put forward in a DVP back in October, which was approved, was simply to have the same layouts and the same format to phase 3 as phase 1 has. Phase 1 and 2 both have 1.5 and 3. And so we won't look any different than those phases. In fact, we would look terribly different if we were not able to achieve this recommended change to the old MP1 restriction of 5 meters for lots in less than 460 square meters. And I'm not sure I made some notes. I'm not sure if I missed anything. So if any one of the directors would like to pose another question or repeat their previous question to me, I certainly invite that.
Well, I'll jump in here because I remembered the question that I'd asked and we hadn't gone there yet. So my question was, given the current lot size and the current restriction of 5 meters for construction, is it possible for vehicles, if this weren't to pass and we were to keep it as is it possible for vehicles to go down either one side or the other of a building and park in the rear, as opposed to having your front of your house and your driveway all situated in the front of the property?
Well, if you did do that, if your driveway passed by your building and was at the rear, then you would only be able to have what would look like a bachelor suite. You'd have your kitchen, seating area, bedroom, and bathroom all in one single line. You wouldn't have any more room than a maybe 3 or 4 foot hallway, so that you would in fact look just like a mobile home, but stick frame.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have questions? Director, I'll go to Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification to the applicant there, if I understand this correctly, this was brought forward in October and was approved by the board, and then it was found that it was not legal for the board to approve that, and now it's back here for approval again, and we're still discussing it. So I'm kind of confused why we're discussing it if it was approved previously in October. So was it approved in October?
Director Wilson, is that a question for the applicant or for staff? I think it's more appropriate.
I'm sure the applicant can answer it, but he did allude to it during his answer just now. But was it approved in October?
Mr. Bellavance?
Yes, in fact, it was approved, and then Mr. Tippett hastily moved me off into a private room so that he could inform me that it couldn't legally be approved by the board of directors because it was a density issue. He would confirm that with legal counsel, and then he would move swiftly to have this move forward so that we could move on the development of this product. And this is back in October 2019. We're now May 2020.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Director Salmon?
Yeah, thank you. It was a timely question, but I do remember October, and you probably remember I asked you about the E&N tracks and the undermining that your excavators caused and when that would be fixed. And I believe you said next week or very soon, but could we have an update on that? And what's the possible, any implications for your subdivision?
So I'm going to take the 5th because I cannot confirm, nor has any one of the geotechnical experts that have been involved so far confirmed that the undermining that you suggest by our excavator caused the slide. In fact, we have found that area sits on top of granite, and there's a material there that became super saturated and that caused the slope failure. So we originally took on the task back in October when I discussed this with you. I was working directly with the Island Corridor Railway Foundation, and we had our own engineers undertaking the task. The Railway Foundation decided that their expert, Mr. Smith from WestTrek, had a greater degree in knowledge for the rebuilding and stabilization for the future use of the railway corridor. And so Ryzik Engineering, who is world-renowned, they work around the world.
Mr. Bellavance,
stepped aside. And
sorry to cut you off.
To your question,
yeah,
the answer to your question is the site is deemed safe, and we expect the final profile plan to be out very shortly, so we can go ahead and work with the railway for the remediation.
And thank you for that. And I'd remind directors to keep to the question at hand, which is rezoning and setback changes. So are there any further questions for the applicant before I release them and go to the director for the area? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Bellavance, for your input and answering of your questions. And I believe this is, oh, my screen just went dark. And Director Acton, is this one of your files? Director Acton, I'll go to you. What's your pleasure?
Yep, I would like to move it. And I think everybody had some good points, especially Director Yanni DiNardo about placemaking. And yeah, so I hope that the parking lot and the
hang on, let me get a seconder. Let me get a seconder here first before you make comments. I'll come right back to you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Wilson. Okay, go ahead, Director Acton.
Thank you. I hope that you know, that Mr. Bellavance is working with a template that is challenging, and he's trying to have some high density there, and he's come into the project late. This is so the stage has not really been set perfectly for him, so that is unfortunate, but I hope that there'll be some elements of placemaking, and the strata will use either the parking lot or these very few extra spaces for the community, and they can have a sense of place there, can add a little bit more to the charm. Because I know a lot of families do live there, and I know some of them, and they do love having that tight community, and the kids are out running around, but they're just on the street running around. So I hope that you can create a little bit of semblance of place. Anyway, I'd like to move it.
It's been moved and seconded. And are there any other discussion? Director Salmon, I'll read the resolution at the end. Director Salmon, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm proposing, if Director Acton might want to second this, I don't know, but could we add a provision that that this pass a geotechnical inspection prior to adoption of the bylaw?
Turn to staff. Is there a requirement for a geotechnical assessment in your opinion, Mr. Limshu?
Sorry about that. You know, certainly if it's a concern of the committee and the board, we can certainly work with the applicant to provide that information moving forward.
Okay, I'd like to move that then.
Director, seconded by Director Acton, I believe. And would you like to speak to that?
Me?
The amendment, yes.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like that to at least be worked with staff, because I have walked those tracks, and I'm not sure if it was with Director Salmon or members of our APC, and it was of concern to the community, and just to ensure that you know, the other previous developments in that area have cost the community significant gas tax money, and there has been some other issues that have come about because of a slope issue too. And so it would be nice just to make sure that that doesn't repeat itself.
May I just jump in for a minute?
No, hang on for just a sec. We got resolutions on the floor and I can't take applicant direction any longer. So I just want to be clear, does this amendment to the resolution have anything to do with the relaxation of setbacks? Because I think from what it sounds like, Director Salmon introduced the resolution as something to do with the ENN tracks. And this is simply a rezoning that has to do with setbacks and front yards and side yards. So it may be a completely appropriate resolution, but not attached to this. So I would like to ask staff for some input as to the appropriateness of an amendment. We haven't voted on it yet, but the appropriateness of an amendment that seems to be a diversion from the initial intent of the resolution. Mr. Limshu, can you help us?
Mr. Chair, thank you for that, because I was thinking about the question was crossing my mind as well as to whether or not the resolution pertains to the buildability of the proposed subdivision, or are we talking about issues off the property?
Director Salmon.
I'm concerned about the buildability.
Okay, can you explain further? Because I don't understand how a relaxation of a setback and a siting has anything to do with the geotechnical stability of near the ENN tracks. And if someone could tie that together for me, they seem to be completely separate entities, and it help me to understand more how that amendment helps this application move forward. And I would even ask if our host and legislative services might be able to help us with this. Since we don't have our host back online yet, Director Wilson.
I understand what Director Salmon is getting at here, but I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Chair. This has nothing to do with the thing that's on the floor right now. And I'm going to make a comment here. It used to be said, and I'm sure it still be said, but not so much nowadays, that the biggest problem was the planning department. It doesn't seem to be that way anymore. It's the discussions that go on here that hold things up.
Thank you, Director Wilson. I go to Ms. Legault and ask if I see you waving for Ms. Legault in regards to the applicability of this attempted amendment in regards to the application that's before us.
Thank you, and my apologies, Mr. Chair. I did not hear the wording of the original amendment, as I was involved with some other applicant issues in the meeting.
Ms. Herrera, did you hear? Oh, well, no, that wouldn't be appropriate to you, but I see you've popped up. Ms. Herrera, what do you have to offer us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to remind the committee that the DP that was issued actually does have conditions in it around the geotechnical concern. And so the CVRD staff, when this subdivision comes around for approval, we're not going to be issuing what we call our subdivision compliance letter until we have the applicant has demonstrated that all the stabilization issues that may be there have been rectified. And so that will be one of the conditions for us to sign off on the subdivision, and that's been established through the development permit.
So if I'm to understand correctly, then this is covered under development permit and it is superfluous to the resolution that's before us on the building setbacks. It's already being dealt with through development permit, correct?
Yes, it is a development permit. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Director Acton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Wilson, I understand that your impatience on this, but this was actually wording that was given to us by staff. So, you know, we're not totally versed on these types of things, and we did know that it was something the community was concerned about. So I'm glad it's cleared up then, and you know, I'm happy for us to call the question.
So before we move to answering or to calling a question, I'm going to deem that because it's being dealt with in the development permit, that we won't accept the amendment to this particular resolution, and that I'm ruling it out of order. We're going to go to the main motion, which I haven't read out yet, but I see Director Limshu or Mr. Limshu trying to get my attention. Mr. Limshu.
Oh no, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. So I'm going to read the resolution, which goes as follows, that it be recommended to the board, one, that a zoning amendment bylaw for application number RZ19B04 for PID 005997283 be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second readings. 2, that a public hearing be waived for application number RZ19B04 in accordance with section 464 sub 2 of the Local Government Act, as the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the South Cowichan Official Community Plan Bylaw number 3510. That's the resolution that's before us. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? I'm opposed. That motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Bellavance. The next item is...
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. The next item is R4. Mr. Limshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for this report. Basically, the report that's before the committee is for information. It's essentially a follow-up from a meeting that was held April 29th, where the rezoning application 18A02 for the Erie property was discussed and deliberated as to whether or not the bylaw should go forward for first and second reading. At that meeting, there were questions around building height and fire protection. And so the purpose of the report really is to provide further clarity with respect to the building height. As outlined in the staff report, we did have follow-up discussion with the applicant to confirm that the proposed buildings would be limited to a maximum of 4 stories. The bylaw has been amended to reflect that. And I guess the only other point that I want to mention, rezoning is just one process that the applicants will have to go through. Assuming that the zoning amendments are adopted, the developers will have to come back and apply for a development permit and ultimately building permit. And certainly through those different processes, we will be evaluating whether or not the project and the proposed buildings meet the requirements with respect to fire protection. In particular, through the building code, The code does outline requirements for fire protection, and certainly the design and the building plans will be valuable in that context.
Thank you for that, Mr. Limshoot. Just I knew that there was something else to do with R4 that we had to address as well, and I think just in hearing what staff have said and clarifications around the fire protection and the amenities and the likes, that I feel comfortable with this going forward. But I know that Director Salmon had to do some work on clarifying the amenity contribution, and I think he has some wording that he would introduce. But I would go to Ms. Legault and ask, where would be the appropriate place for the wording around the amenity contribution go? Ms. Legault?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did also want to note that we have the agent for this application on the WebEx as well today, Mark Holland, in case there's any questions for the agent. And I do believe that there is a related item under unfinished business, UB1, that was referred from the last board meeting. That's appropriate place for Salmon to introduce his motion, and perhaps it can be moved up after it's concluded so that we can deal with both items at the same time.
That sounds perfect. I think that, so this item is for information, and I would ask if it does, I'll go to Director Salmon next. The amenity stuff can wait, but anything around this information item?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe since there's been some interest from the public about the fire aspect, and we have Mr. Holland on the line, maybe I could just ask him to give us a bit of a background on where the Malhat Fire Department stands with this. If he's
so tell you what, I think it's probably not appropriate to ask the applicant where the fire department is, but I think it's more than appropriate to ask the applicant where the applicant is on their file. So Mr. Holland, can you join in and let us know where your client is in regards to some of the concerns around fire protection and that sort of thing? Mr. Holland, welcome. And did you hear the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I did.
Everybody turn their... How are you doing now?
That was quite impressive. That was a stadium presentation. Still lots of echo. I'm not quite sure.
Are you, have you got your phone on as well?
No.
Okay, I'm looking.
Just hang on a second. Let me change mics if I can.
I'm looking at everyone else's mic is off except for yours and mine, so there shouldn't be any feedback. You want to test?
Okay, no, still. Okay, how is that? Still bouncing. Is this any different? Never had this happen before.
I'm just looking to see if anybody else. Director Acton, can you turn your mic off?
Now, well, I was going to suggest Mr. Holland signing out and then signing back in. That might help. But
sure. Okay.
Just test again.
I think it's still echoing. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Ms. Legault, any suggestions? Hang on, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like there are two WebEx sessions going for Mr. Holland, so I'm going to try and move the one that doesn't have his video feed into the lobby to see if perhaps that helps.
Yeah, I thought I saw his name on here twice. Yes, we do have two Mark Hollands.
Okay, so let's test that again.
Mark?
Is this any better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for the help there, getting that sorted out. Never had that happen before. had some big public meetings in very large cavernous spaces, but never something with that much echo. Thank you again, Mr. Chair, committee members, for your attention on this, and thank you, Director Blaze, for your question regarding the fire department. I've had many good conversations with the fire chief, Tanya Patterson, including one just yesterday about this, and I've also had extensive conversations with our architect about the different discussions on height, etc. I believe that a resident, Cliff Evans, had raised this question of ladder trucks and the heights of buildings. And I've met with the fire department previous to this to go over everything in detail, and there's been an ongoing conversation. In discussions with Chief Patterson regarding the building height issue, she noted that this would be the only 3 to 4 story building. And again, we do not know actually how tall the buildings will be yet. We put a cap at 4 stories, and the sort of the slightly higher than usual height limits have to do with most of the sites they will be building on are likely 30% slope or greater in some cases, and that begins to move around how you measure building height a bit. So slightly higher ones are recommended by the architect to allow some flexibility for the facilities. The architect has actually indicated that he would be surprised if we get to 4, probably 3, but he asked that we keep it at 4 in consultation with the landowner, and so thus it remains. Chief Patterson noted that this would be the only building basically over 2.5 stories in her entire jurisdiction that would basically deal with this, certainly anything over 3. And as such, having a very expensive ladder truck and facility to store it would be considered unreasonable in her opinion regarding the kind of firefighting responses that would be there. And so we proceeded on that discussion. My meeting with her yesterday, we went over the plumbing details that she would like to see, and they've been further discussed with the architect. All of this will be dealt with. I'm not a building code specialist or a plumbing specialist in these regards, and so I'm deferring to these other folks, and I'm sorry you're hearing it secondhand from me. But the discussion would include potentially some dry sprinklering or standpipes in the building. Certainly standpipes outside the building would be connected to preferably gravity-fed reservoirs next to every building that is built, so that their trucks can easily hook up to resupply with water, and their pumper systems can activate firefighting equipment inside of the building. The details on all of that will be worked out at building permit level. We have both development permits and building permits yet ahead. The fire department will be discussed and engaged at each one of those stages, and any fire requirements that are in building permits obviously will be met going forward.
Mike, Ian?
That sounds like I hit the button 3 times. Excellent clarification, Mark. Does that meet your needs there, Director Salmon?
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I see Director Smith has a question for the applicant. Director Smith.
It's not really for the applicant, it's for staff. Because we're going through the harmonized official community plan. Where does this type of application fit in, as it's not just a small application, it's a large area? And where does it fit in with the process that we're going through right now? Do we have staff on that can answer that possibly?
Well, I'll take the question because we're dealing with the zoning that's on the books and an application that's already been submitted. The harmonized official community plan and the OCP changes and the area plans are yet to be contemplated and made law by us. So this is a separate and discrete application within the current laws that are on the books. Were you asking for more than that? Was there more of a planning process around this? Because this should be done by the time the official community plans, the HOCP is completed. Did you need more?
So I know Mark, through working on the harmonized official community plan, and we have him here working on an application, but we also, as CBRD, have hired him as a consultant for our harmonized official community plan. Are we making sure that we're in not getting ourselves into a bit of a box. I mean, Mark's amazing. He's been leading us through the harmonized official community plan, moving into modernization. And I don't want to see us get caught up in some way with this situation and this application. So is Legislative Services able to answer that, or do we have someone else on staff that can answer that? Because we don't want Mark caught in something and ourselves caught in something as we move through this.
Ms. Legault, I don't see the linkage, but I'll go to Ms. Legault or Mr. Limshu has his hand up. Mr. Limshu.
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at it. You know, the two processes are two separate processes, as alluded to by the chair. In a perfect world, we will, and you know, for Mark and his client, we'll be through this process before the harmonization OCP document comes into play. Having said that, we do have a number of in-stream applications that are currently underway, and there is coordination between current planning, development services and current planning to ensure that, you know, if there's going to be an overlap, that the amendment bylaws take that into account. But really and truly, we should be focused on the merits of this particular application in front of us.
Ms. Legault, do you concur? Thank you. Any other questions? I thought I saw another hand go up. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I am wondering about the rationale for the impervious surface limits. So we have a minimum parcel size for any lot in a CD5 zone to be 36.14 hectares. And we have a impervious surface coverage shall not exceed 35% and no more than 20% may be parcel coverage. And I was wondering what the rationale for that was.
Is that a question to staff or question to the applicant?
Yeah, please.
Mr. Limshu.
I'm going to ask staff planner Wright for assistance on this.
Ms. Wright, could you join us, please?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. So actually, the CD zone was drafted by the applicant, and although staff had input on a lot of it, we did leave that provision alone. So I would actually pass this over to Mr. Holland to answer a little more succinctly than I can.
Mr. Holland.
Thank you. Through the chair, it's a good question. The discussion about water and stormwater has been a key issue on this process. There wasn't, as we stand now, there isn't a detailed site plan for the site. We're going to move forward into those areas. There is a conceptual one that was offered that would show basically where the terrain would support some buildings. The impervious coverage was set at those levels as a general estimate of to give some freedom and some movement, including possibly some covered walkways, the buildings, the parking areas, all of that would be at a maximum that would allow it to be of a hard surface. It leaves a very significant amount of the site still as a soft surface, and we're not dealing with storm drainage that would be moved off the site in any form that would impact anything. So in the absence of a very detailed plan, these were set as general guidelines. I'm optimistic we won't probably get anywhere near that once the site plan has worked itself out, in part because the buildings will be nestled into the landscapes, and the natural beauty of the area is a very significant piece of what the area basically its competitive advantage in competing with large urban resorts. But it was to allow some general flexibility that those numbers were set.
And as I think I've heard from staff on some of the previous applications that we deal with, stormwater management is something that is top of mind when they're either dealing at development permit stage or whether building permit and the like. So Director Nicholson, anything further on that vein of questioning? You're good? Okay, so this is an information, Director Nicholson.
I would just like to point out that guidelines say that anything above 10% is starting to degrade the site hydrologically. And I remain really concerned that many of our zones in electoral areas have very high impervious coverage minimums, which seem completely out of line with watershed protection.
Thank you for that, Director Nicholson. So I see no other hands in the air for questions, and this is an information item only. We'll be revisiting this under unfinished business. So with that, I want to thank you, Mr. Holland, and you may want to be sticking around for later on in the presentation. Are you making that available to him, Ms. Legault?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought you were bringing that item up forward.
Oh, you want me to do that then? Okay, everybody, we're going to reorder the agenda and we're going to bring, I think it's UB1 forward now. And this, I will turn to Mr. Limshu. I don't know that you've got a presentation. This was referred back. Do you want to introduce this for us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a formal presentation. It's my understanding when the recommendations went to the board, there was some discussion around where the amenity contribution funds would be directed into, ultimately into what fund. And I believe that is what's up for discussion at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. I turn to Director Salmon, who I believe has some wording that we will be adding. And Ms. Legault, would we be just adding that as a fifth point under this, or just clarifying it under number 2 that updated community amenity contribution provisions? What's your pleasure on this, Ms. Legault?
Well, there's always more than one way to accomplish that. So we could simply amend item part 2 of the recommendation, or we could make an entirely separate recommendation.
Tell you what, let's go with the simple one. We'll add a item number 5 to be very clear. And Director Salmon, you've got the wording in front of you?
I sent it to Ms. Legault.
Okay, I think I've got it here as well. So let me just pull it up. I only have 2 hands. Okay, here we go. We'll number this number 5, I believe. And that will be that we'll add it as to amend the we have to have the resolution on the floor. Anybody want to move 1 through 4? Director Salmon?
Yep.
Moved. Second by Director Kuhn. Excellent. And then there's an amendment to the resolution, which will be a number 5 that says that the community amenity contribution earmarked for the Kerry Park Center Capital Project Reserve Fund instead go to the Electoral Area A Community Parks Parkland Acquisition Reserve Fund. That's moved by Director Salmon, seconded by Director Wilson.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, I think Ms. Legault had better wording, than that was in a subsequent email to that one.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have printed it out.
Does that meet the intent of what you're looking for?
Yes, that's fine. That
Okay.
was my wording. Okay.
Okay,
Moved.
so it's been moved and seconded. So I'll vote on the amended the resolution as amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? We got none opposed. And the resolution, I just called a vote for it as amended. So is that sufficient, Ms. Legault?
I think you're fine.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Holland. I think we're good.
Thank you all very much. It's a privilege.
Next item is, anybody need a break? We've got a few. I see a lot of nodding here. So it's 4:04. Meet you back here at 4:15. Don't
Mr.
forget.
Chair, just so you know that there is a call-in user here, and that's the applicant for R5.
I think we're going to have a break. Everybody's gone.
Yeah, just for a heads up for when you come back.
Thank you. Just waiting on the go ahead. No. Oh.
Oh, good to go.
Thank you, Ms. Legault. Welcome back, everyone. We are now on application R5. It's an information item. We have the applicant on the line if we have any need for questions, and I turn to Mr. Limshu for an explanation of this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R5 relates to application number RZ20C01. This particular application was considered at the April 29th, 2020 EAC meeting. At that time, the committee recommended moving the application forward for first reading. The report before you is strictly for information. It just outlines some minor amendments we've made to the bylaw since that April 29th meeting. The amendments are minor in nature and basically provides further clarification as it relates to time of operation, deliveries, and then the and number of employees permitted. The intent is still to create this zone, which would treat this potential development as a home-based business.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. I see Mr. Tippett has joined us. So do you have anything to add, or has he given us a good clarification of this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just add that the amendments are essentially following our discussion about what content should be in the proposed covenant, and we're about to engage in discussions with Mr. Redden on the content of the covenant. Some items are better dealt with under covenant terms than in zoning, and the first draft of the zoning bylaw that committee saw last time contained some items that we deemed would be better dealt with in the covenant. So that's essentially the reason why the minor adjustment is made, and we're hoping that I think this is going to be on the board agenda next week for first reading. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So minor amendments, some items going into covenants. Do any of the directors have any questions for staff on this information item? Seeing none, let's move on to the next item, R6. This is an information item as well. I think we all have seen the trends. I think they're probably COVID-19 related. And we've got Mr. McDonald on the line if we need him. Does anyone have any questions in regards to the Inspection and Enforcement Division report? No. Oh, Mr. McDonald would like to introduce something. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to make a quick comment. So the numbers were definitely down in April, but I'd just like to everybody know that I just ran the numbers yesterday and we're already way ahead of last month as of yesterday. So we've already issued 22 permits, so we're adapting to COVID and the way we have to do business, and so is the public.
I hope you're keeping safe out there. So no other hands in the air. Everybody's happy with the information. Appreciate the report, Mr. McDonald. And on to the next item, which will be R7, and that is that Mr. Limshu as well, or I think this might be Ms. Breen, actually. Do we have a staff person taking R7? Ah, Ms. Sherrill. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Ms. Breen's item, and Mr. Tippett is also on the call, but this is simply a request for a resolution to amend the function 325 budget to accommodate the grant that we're receiving for the regional housing needs assessment. So no change to the budget. It's really about accounting. So increasing conditional grant revenue by $150,000 and then increasing consultants expense by $150,000. So there's no net change to the budget.
I have two directors waving their hands in the air. Director Yanni DiNardo, followed by Kuhn and Acton.
I just want to move.
DiNardo. You're going to move it?
Yes, please.
Director, is somebody seconding? We got a seconder and alternate Director Haim. So Director Kuhn, did you have a question?
Yes, I wonder, I seem to remember when the whole affordable housing program was announced or was requested, there was a presentation done and there were quite a number of details as to what housing requirements there were, and there were all kinds of figures. And I seem to remember I was quite impressed. Now that stuff couldn't have been all that old. And now we're going to spend another $150,000 on another study. It seems we spend more money on studies than anything else. And so anyway, I want to express my concern about that, because there seems to be no end to having studies and surveys done and this and that. And, you know, the question comes up, when are we actually going to put some money into some bricks or something like?
Director Kuhn, just for clarification, this is a requirement under the Local Government Act, and it's not an affordable housing assessment. It's a across the board housing needs assessment. So it's a completely different kettle of fish. It's money that's coming in the door to do work that we would have to do. And all this is a simple budget amendment saying we'll take the money and we'll spend the money. So beyond that, are there any other questions in regards to this item? I had Director Smith followed by Acton. Director Smith.
So I have a question. So the grant fund is for a project that involves 9 electoral areas and 4 incorporated municipalities, but for a regional housing needs assessment. But function 325, community planning, is only funded by electoral areas. This to me is a regional grant, because it's going to have the 4 incorporated municipalities information. And I don't think that this is the right function to put this in. It should be under some form of regional and function. So maybe finance can explain how we're putting something that's regional into an electoral area only budget.
Well, I think for the first point, we don't have a regional planning function, and these are grant dollars coming in and grant dollars going out to a consultant, so there won't be any expense to the function. And so I don't know that there's a function that we have that would be different that we could put it in, but appropriate enough as long as it's not costing our taxpayers any dollars or any staff resources. I could see why it's come here, but Ms. Weiner, if you'd like to wade in and give an explanation as to why this function.
Through the chair to Director Smith, if this was an opportunity that we could expand and have more money for the study. So if it wasn't being done, it would have been done just for the electoral areas anyways. So because of that, we're just expanding, and there is no function for the whole region wide. But even if there was only a small portion for the EAS, it would only be covered by the EAS. This was just an opportunity to get more funding for a bigger project that benefits the district. So,
Ms. Weiner, follow up.
So you're saying that the 4.5% government allocation won't be for this 150,000, won't come out of 325, or will it come out of the grant?
Ms. Weiner?
The allocation goes on the expenses at that point of the year in the year. So it would be looked at 2 years down, and this is a net zero. So it's not operating costs. This is a grant function. This is not an operational cost.
So the 4.5% doesn't apply. Director Acton, no question. Any further questions on this? I don't believe I had a mover and a seconder yet, or did I? I did. Okay, the resolution is that it be recommended to the board that the budget for function 325, community planning, be amended by 1, increasing conditional grant revenue by $150,000, and 2, increasing consultants expense by $150,000. Any further discussion? I will now call the question. All those in favor? Oh, hang on. Director Smith wants to have further discussion.
So I just want to be clear that there's not going to be any additional funding coming out of 325. There's not going to be staff time involved in this. There isn't going to be any kind of additional amount of money, that it's just in and out with no expenses to electoral area direct under this function.
Ms. Weiner?
Through the chair to Director Smith, no, all expenses for this is going to be covered by the function. So by the grant, sorry. So the grant funding of $150,000 will come in. The expenditures to do it will be $150,000, and then there is no allocation that will come from the general government allocation, which is the 2 years down from it, because it's grant funding that's 100% funded.
Thank you, Ms. Weiner. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. R8. Report from the Water Management Division in regards to loan authorization for Shawnigan North. Which staff person is taking? Oh, Mr. Dennison, there you are. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been in hiding the whole time, waiting for my moment to come. So reports R8 and R10 are essentially the same thing. They are applications for grant funds, one for Shawnigan Lake North and one for Missachi Lake Sewer and Honeymoon Bay, that the board's already approved, and the grant applications have already been submitted. They require the first 3 readings though of loan authorization bylaws without consent necessarily being offered, just to, I think, confirm that the board understands that there are going to be expenses related to this customers of the system. So that's very clear to the province that the board is well aware of that. So these 2 reports, R8 and R10, bring forward those bylaws.
So, Mr. Dennison, would I be correct in calling this setting the table for receiving the grants if we're that lucky?
That would be an apt way to put it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo. Moving it. Director Acton seconding. Any discussion on the resolution? Oh, I should read it out. That CVRD bylaw number 4327, Shawnigan Lake North Water System Service Loan Authorization, $1.62 million water treatment project bylaw 2020 be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That motion carries. I'm going to do R10 next because it's essentially the same thing. Mr. Dennison, it's the same thing, but Missachi Lake, Honeymoon Bay. Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. The resolution is that CVRD bylaw number 4324, Missachi Lake Sewer System Service Amendment, Boundary Extension Name Change Bylaw 2020, and CVRD bylaw number 4325, South Shore Communities Loan Authorization Phase 2-Sewage Collection and Treatment Project Bylaw 2020 be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings. It's been duly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, we have discussion. Director Smith.
So I'd just like some clarification. I know that there's a Missachi Lake sewer system function, but Honeymoon Bay doesn't have a sewer or sewer function. And is there a new utility in Honeymoon Bay for sewer? Can someone just clarify that?
I can give a real quick synopsis of what's happened here.
Can I ask staff, please?
You can ask staff. Go ahead. Sure. Mr. Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The application that's been forwarded is to bring about sewer servicing in Honeymoon Bay. We got that grant to connect in Missachi Lake to this land that we got through the rezoning process immediately adjacent to or part of Honeymoon Bay, and which has a large disposal capacity. And so this application would add in some treatment to that disposal field system and provide servicing in Honeymoon Bay as phase 2. And then phase 3 of the overall program would be to replace the dilapidated existing servicing in Massachusetts Lake. So that expands the service area, addresses problems with on-site failures in both Honeymoon Bay and our dilapidated sewer system in Massachusetts Lake later on as phase 3 in the program.
Follow up.
So in part of it, we're taking on the CVRD is taking on a new sewer system by Honeymoon Bay having a sewer system, or they're going to be combined to be one function. Is that what's happening?
Mr. Dennison?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the idea is to call it the South Shore Sewer Service Area. So that would include both communities in one system. And then we always want to do that because, the greater number of customers you have, the more cost effective it is per customer, right? So instead of having two systems, we'd have one system. Honeymoon Bay would be joining. There's no sewer there at all. Now it's all on-site septic, a number of problems in the area. And so this would provide some new servicing, new pipes in the ground to collect that sewage, convey it to this property, and that would be part of the same system with Massachusetts Lake.
Are there any further questions? This is a very long-awaited, and we're all sitting here fingers crossed in the hopes that this will proceed, because this is right along the lines of what the Innova report had suggested that we do in our communities. So seeing no other hands, I will call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Go back to R9. Mr. Dennison, your turn to shine again.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had a failure of part of this collection system at our Buttes Ridge sewer. It's actually a bit of an awkward arrangement. So they have a lower lift station that pumps up to an upper booster station, which pumps it up again into the collection system. So it's part of the booster, one of the booster pumps has failed. Looking at it though, we've identified that there's new technologies available in sewage pumps. And rather than having this dual stage approach to it, we can have a single stage and just put in the new pumps in the lower lift station. They're more expensive, but the existing sets of pumps, both the one that's failed, the adjacent partner with it, and the two below are all due for replacement shortly anyway. So this would then be able to eliminate one of the pump stations, which would be in the long term a much lower asset management commitment, less staff time, and we believe would save money. So we're recommending that the operational reserve funds, which we have significant available, be used to pay for the new pump system.
Turn to Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dennison, it's very soon to have a failure this quickly. No warranties?
Mr. Dennison.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, to be clear, this has nothing to do with the treatment system that we just upgraded. This is the collection system, which is the original. As originally came, with our Buttes Ridge in the long, dim mists of past.
Okay, thank you.
Director Wilson, would you like to move the recommendation? Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Kuhn, and the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board, 1, that the 2020 budget for function 815, our Buttes Ridge sewer system, be amended to A, increase transfer operational reserve funding by $120,000, B, increase capital engineering structures by $120,000, and 2, that expenditure of these funds prior to adoption of the budget bylaw amendment be approved. Any further discussion on those items? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Done a great job, Mr. Dennison. Thank you. Ms. Legault, I'm scrolling through my agenda, and I believe unless I'm mistaken, we are now at question period. So, in regards to question period, have you had any submissions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One just came in as you were speaking. This is from Susan Kaufman and Salmon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Sometimes as part of your job, the EASC has to make some tough decisions. Today was one of those days. As avid RVers, I can attest to Director Yanni DiNardo's sentiment about needing more RV sites, but as Director Salmon alluded, this was a case of appropriate location and safety. Mr. Chair, it was good to see the applicants or their agents were able to participate electronically today. Can you give an update on when the planning commissions and the members of the public may resume participation through electronic means? Without the means to do so, the public's ability to comment and participate is constrained. And then there's a second part to the question if you wanted to.
Okay, I'll take the first part. No, I can't give an update. Last Wednesday, the board authorized that exploration of the matter be directed, and as soon as we have any news on that front, the public will be made aware. Next question.
This is also from Ms. Kaufman, and it says, Director Smith expressed a concern for the CVRD and Mr. Holland in his dual role of working for the CVRD and as the applicant or agent, in this case on R4. Would it be beneficial for both Mr. Holland and the CVRD to determine if a conflict of interest, real or perceived, be determined offline and a report be generated to EASC? And that concludes the question period.
Well, at this point, I think it was very clear, at least in my mind, and it was followed up with staff, that they are very separate functions and that there is no lines of intersection in the project that Mr. Holland is undertaking on behalf of the CVRD and his role of agent on that particular file. And at this point, I will discuss with our legislative services and our general manager of land use services and perhaps even the CAO, but I don't see it, but I will seek other opinion and can report back at the next EASC meeting. And are there any other questions?
The final one just arrived, and this submission is from Cliff Evans. Mr. Chair, what kind of gravity pressure is expected to get out of the gravity flow water storage for Mr. Holland's projects for firefighting? One of the water storage options was the Erie.
You cut out there, Ms. Legault.
Okay, so let me try this again. Mr.
Yes.
Chair, what kind of gravity water pressure does Mark Holland expect to get out of gravity water flow storage for this project's firefighting? One of the water storage options was the Erie swimming pool, question mark. And then the maximum heights of the buildings allowed according to the application is 17 meters. No matter which way you slice it into stories, would you rather have a fire department coming to rescue yourself in a 17-meter high with a 24-foot ladder or a fire truck with a 12-foot ladder?
So in regards to the first question, I have no idea what Mr. Holland's understanding of flow and pressures are in regards to gravity-fed systems, and it's our role as elected officials to rely on the expert advice that are provided to us by the people on staff. And it's my understanding and my belief that if a gravity feed water storage system is recommended for that particular project, that the engineering work and the appropriate mechanisms to provide adequate fire flows will be provided as a matter of their building permit and application process that they go through. In regards to the second question about how would I like to be rescued in a 3rd or 3 or 4 story building, I would be rest assured that knowing that whatever jurisdiction I be in, whether it be in the Cowichan Valley or the city of Victoria or anybody else or anywhere else in the province where I might choose to staycation this year due to COVID-19, that those jurisdictions have the appropriate firefighting apparatus to ensure that any of the residents and the visitors to their areas are safe in whatever structure they be in, whether it be in a hotel in downtown Vancouver or whether it be a flat piece of ground in a campground somewhere. So I think that as long as the fire departments and the CVRD individuals responsible for ensuring that adequate fire protection is in place and they assure us that they are, then I'll be happy with that. Does that conclude the questions from the public, Ms. Legault? So I do have a question that I have to get back to Ms. Kaufman. Other than that, I think we don't have a closed session today, and it would be appropriate if someone were to move adjournment. Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Thank you, everybody, for your cooperation and participation today.
Well, thank you. See you.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye now.